The Hobgoblin has been around since the Dungeons & Dragons White Box released in 1974, making it one of the original monsters. It appears in every edition thereafter, always showing up in the monster manual and always in the first one. So why did this deep dive almost not happen? One might think it would be easy to find a plethora of information on this creature, and it was. The problem was that all the information remained basically the same. If you go back through our previous deep dives, you'll see that most of the creatures that we discussed changed throughout the editions, some drastically from one edition to the next, others changing like a slow burn so that by the 5th edition they are just the shell of the creature they once were. The Hobgoblin remains, well, a Hobgoblin. Sure, we get more details on their changing appearance, how their societal and political systems work, and how their favorite weapon changes, but there are no major changes in its core stats or abilities. They still have under a dozen hit points, their AC is good but not great, and they're still lawful evil. Based on what we are seeing, there wasn't going to be much to talk about beyond the new little bit of lore you get each edition. A deep dive should demand that we drill down just a little further than everyone else and find those little nuggets of information that people never knew about. Otherwise, we'd just be another in a long list of articles that just cuts and pastes the description from each of the monster manuals and passes it off as an in-depth look at the said creature. We not only owe you, the listener, more than that, but we owe it to the Hobgoblin itself. It's a creature with a rich and storied history outside of D&D, and that history is completely ignored, making the Hobgoblin a twisted, unrecognizable creature when compared to its brethren in folklore and literature. The Hobgoblin was never the older, meaner cousin of a goblin. In fact, while the goblin has been described as ugly, evil, and a mean creature, the Hobgoblin wasn't at all about being evil, but about mischief. Hobgoblins were pranksters, more interested in seeing what bad things could happen, instead of being the direct instrument of evil. The character of Puck from Shakespeare's A Midsummer's Night Dream is the example of a hobgoblin that is most commonly presented throughout our research. You see, the word hobgoblin is a combination of goblin with the word hob, which means elf or sprite. They are not creatures bigger than orcs, meaner than goblins, and living in tribes that spread chaos and death throughout the land. They tie your shoelaces together while you eat dinner, or whisper in your ear that your beloved has eyes for another. Hobgoblins laugh and cackle in glee at the mischief they cause, and are a lot like their cousins, the brownie. The Hobgoblin is introduced in the original Dungeons & Dragons White Box released in 1974 as large and fearless goblins having a +1 morale. Morale is important in the original Dungeons & Dragons since it is the mechanic by which the DM determines whether or not the creature continues the fight or runs for the hills. Nowadays, the DM makes the call, but in the original Dungeons & Dragons, the rule was as follows. Quote, a non-player characters and men-at-arms will have to make morale checks using the above reaction table or chainmail whenever a highly dangerous or unnerving situation arises. Poor morale will mean that those in question will not perform as expected. From Men in Magic, page 13, end quote. The Hobgoblin and Goblin are directly tied together in original Dungeons & Dragons as the description overlaps one another. A Hobgoblin king can be found in its lair and may have up to 200 Hobgoblins with him. Both the king and his bodyguards, numbering 2 to 4, fight as if they were an ogre. This just means that they deal extra damage when they hit you with their attacks, and it, unfortunately, means that they aren't carrying around 100 to 600 gold pieces, which is strangely what ogres do when they are walking around away from home. We guess you need a little walking around money, but that seems like a lot to just be walking around with. The Hobgoblin also goes aquatic with the Coelant, a type of water-breathing hobgoblin that resides in the water. Beyond that, no other information is given for the Coelant in the Blackmore supplement released in 1975.
Not much changes for the Hobgoblins in this edition, but they are re-released in the Dungeons & Dragons box set from 1997 and reaffirm that they are relatives of goblins, but bigger and meaner. They live underground, and the Hobgoblin King and his 1 to 4 bodyguards all fight like ogres. They are each stronger than the common Hobgoblin, and while the Hobgoblin King is alive, the Hobgoblin morale is higher. This edition is the first to make the Hobgoblin a playable race, and it comes in the Orcs of Thar Gazetteer. It allows players to create humorous characters based off of goblins, kobolds, ogres, and you guessed it, the Hobgoblin. Strangely, it seems to take the idea of playing as the normal monstrous races a bit of a joke, and even goes so far as to tell you that when you roll for your charisma, that isn't the same as a human's charisma because you are the monster. In fact, your charisma, when compared to a human, will always be horrible, and to determine your human charisma, you must divide your charisma by 3, round it down, and then subtract that number from 9. So if you have a 15 charisma as a hobgoblin, you would have a 4 charisma as a human. This says a lot about what the older editions thought of hobgoblins, and how that will change as the game continues to evolve.
Hobgoblins are brought back in the first edition Monster Manual released in 1977, and they bring with them far more information about their abilities and civilization. While they are still the cousins to goblins, orcs, and other creatures, they are very distinct and often are used in armies of goblins or orcish troopers to keep them in line and to drive them into battle. Hobgoblins are renowned for their fighting ability, and their culture is geared to be a fighting force. They are described as humanoids with hairy hides of reddish-brown to gray with bright red-orange faces and long blue-red noses. They have yellowish to dark brown eyes with yellow teeth and like wearing either bright, bloody colors or black leather. They always keep their weapons highly polished and are always strapped for combat. Hobgoblins are very tribal and are quite proud of what tribe they come from. Oftentimes, when two rival bands meet, they will begin mocking each other and sometimes start attacking unless their commanders have a firm control on them. They are fiercely loyal to their commanders-in-chief, and many tribes have fearsome names like Flesh Renders, Marrow Suckers, Rippers, and Slow Killers. Most tribes of hobgoblins will reside in lairs underground, but there are some that create their lairs in a village with a ditch, rampart, and palisade of stones, earth, and logs. Wherever they choose to make their home, it is always well fortified, and if able to, will have catapults, ballista, and even carnivorous apes to act as guards. Because hobgoblins have excellent infravision, a form of dark vision, they are at home fighting in complete darkness or outside on the field of glory. Going back to the carnivorous apes, hobgoblins have the ability to speak goblin, orcish, and even the rudimentary tongue of the carnivorous apes. This is sort of strange, but the carnivorous apes are actually pretty smart with an average IQ of 70 plus. These horrible little apes hunger for the flesh of man and have the ability to rend creatures with their brutal speed and power. Another odd thing about these hobgoblins is that they are highly adept at construction and mining and are so good that they can tell when walls are shifting or when passages are sloping, which we mean, sure, they are like the dwarves of the goblins, which is a fine comparison because they only hate elves with extreme prejudice and not dwarves. In fact, they view dwarves with a type of respect because dwarves are fierce warriors and, more importantly, a lawful society. The last thing that the Monster Manual provides is that the Coelenth are back, and we are given a brief description that they are just hobgoblins, but in the water, with green faces and webbed hands and feet. The Coelenth are pretty much hobgoblins, and hobgoblins are pretty much Coelenth. Though there is no mention of how they perceive each other, presumably it is much like two tribes of hobgoblins meeting each other. In Dragon Magazine number 63, released in 1982, the various goblinoid races like kobold, goblin, orcs, and the hobgoblin are further expanded on and their culture revealed. Hobgoblins are focused on being lawful and keep their society together. They rarely show emotion unless it is one of disdain and hatred for the other tribes of hobgoblins and other creatures. When they do show their emotion, it is only when they are alone or think they aren't being watched. The hobgoblins have witch doctors that practice healing magics, but they prefer spells that also hurt as they heal. These priests are also the overseers of their tribes, ensuring that everyone is being lawful and given their respect to the tribes.
The Hobgoblin and the Coelenth are presented in the Monsters Compendium Volume 1 from 1989, and then reprinted in the Monstrous Manual from 1993. They bring precious few changes in this edition, and more or less reinforce all the new things that they brought with them in first edition. But that isn't to say we don't learn anything new in this edition. In fact, we get a full-color picture of them in all their glory. Now, we know making fun of the old edition's artwork is as cliché as a kobold swearing it's just a baby dragon, but we need to address it. The previous artwork for the Hobgoblins showcases them wearing Chinese-inspired armor with lamellar plates of metal, and we assume horns on their helmets. Heads up, horns on helmets are a horrible idea. You don't want anything on your helmet that is going to catch on your opponent's blade, as a helmet is designed to make weapon strikes slide off your head, not catch on it. In the second edition, the Hobgoblins have stripped down some of their plated armor and are wearing what we guess is mongrel-inspired armor. They don't have stupid horns sticking from their helmets, though now it's just hide armor with metal shoulder pauldrons. If nothing else, they got rid of the weird racist eyes in the first edition artwork, though now our Hobgoblins look more or less like apes, which makes some sort of sense as apes are utilized as guards, though we aren't quite sure where the connection between Hobgoblin and ape came from. Beyond getting a few updates to the artwork, we are also given the next big step for Hobgoblins. They become playable character races with the complete book of humanoids from 1993, and then later in the player's option, skills and powers from 1995. Now, they were previously playable in the basic set, but this marks a new rise for the Hobgoblins in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and as a bonus, neither book talks about how a Hobgoblin will never be charismatic. On the other hand, it does list that the monstrous trait that a Hobgoblin has in its appearance, so small victories? The player options go on to explain that for Hobgoblins, war is a way of living, and any that reject that, or their own kind, is a traitor and is a Hobgoblin of weak standing. Many Hobgoblins that leave their own kind are called cowards for interacting with the inferior creatures, and even when adventuring and doing good work for the local townspeople, they are often attacked for being a monster. In fact, dwarves gain a bonus to their attack rolls against Hobgoblins, which is really interesting seeing how Hobgoblins have some respect for dwarves. If any race was going to get a bonus to murder a Hobgoblin, you'd think it would be the elves, as Hobgoblins specifically detest them above all other creatures, and will do everything in their power to kill an elf.
The Hobgoblin returns to the 3rd edition in the Monster Manual 2000 and later released in 2003 with updates, and they are sadly lacking their aquatic brethren, the Coelant. Their arrival in 3rd edition is, well, not many changes. The Hobgoblin believes in the tradition of what it once was and sticks with it throughout the editions of Dungeons & Dragons, which is more than we can say for some monsters, like the Kraken or the Kobold. We are given a short look into the Hobgoblin society, like the biggest and strongest Hobgoblin is typically the leader, and they are often leaders among tribes of goblins and orcs, bullying and treating them like lesser creatures. Hobgoblins are all about them being the best fighters around, and everyone else not worthy of the Hobgoblins. One part of the Hobgoblins that we have been skipping in the past editions is their devotion and reverence for Maglabiot, the patron deity of goblins. Maglabiot was introduced in 2nd edition and was one of the first gods created specifically for Dungeons & Dragons. Maglabiot is also known as the Battle Lord and is renowned for his great prowess in battle and strategies. He is also the enemy of all elven gods, so it's pretty obvious why the Hobgoblins like him so much. In Dragon magazine number 309, released in 2003, an article on the ecology of the Hobgoblin was released, and with it a lot more information on the culture and lifestyle of the Hobgoblins. Apart from the typical information that a Hobgoblin is focused on war, it talks on how Hobgoblins are trained from a young age to be aware of their personal perimeter. This personal perimeter is what separates Hobgoblins from other warriors, because it is the idea that a single humanoid should always be aware of what they can protect by themselves and how you can only protect a larger perimeter by joining up with others. To protect a tribe, you need more than just yourself to protect them. You need an army of Hobgoblins, and if one Hobgoblin is missing, it lessens the perimeter. Hobgoblins, since birth, are led and taught by the spiritual leaders of the Hobgoblins and even their parents, who aren't incredibly active in their development and must listen to the priests and their wisdom. The priests are a major part of Hobgoblin society and have the ability to veto the tribe's leader. They are seen as the guides of the tribe and are in the highest position of the tribe, for they help shape the future Hobgoblins to become fierce warriors and to bring the tribe great victories. More Hoblins come and fill out ranks in 3rd edition, like the Sun-Scorch Hobgoblins and Dragon Magic, released in 2006, and the Hobgoblin, Duskblade, Spellscourge, and Warsoul are in the Monster Manual 5, released in 2007.
The Hobgoblin arrives in the Monster Manual from 2008, though this time it is grouped in under Goblin, which includes bugbears, goblins, and hobgoblins. This edition brings us a large variety of hobgoblins to go to war with, and include the hobgoblin grunt, warrior, archer, soldier, warcaster, and the hand of the bane. Interestingly, the lore is also changed to make hobgoblins the original goblin, and in ancient times they had a huge empire before it crumbled. During the time of their empire, they began experimenting and creating new goblinoids, ideal for certain tasks. Goblins were created to be scouts and infiltrators, while bugbears were created to be elite warriors. Part of the way they created these new goblinoids was through their brutal use of experimentation with magic and the blessings of Maglubiet. While on the topic of Maglubiet, he is no longer a god, but rather a goblinoid exarch of Bane, who they see as the mightiest hobgoblin war chief. Those who seek to be like Bane, like the hobgoblin hand of Bane, will throw themselves into the thickest of fights and battles, challenging any and all around them. The soldiers of hobgoblins do everything with a focus on combat and battle, and even their magic users only focus on spells that inflict damage or help further the hobgoblin's might on the field of battle.
The Hobgoblin's final form comes in the 5th edition Monster Manual, released in 2014, and is greatly expanded on in Bolo's Guide to Monsters, released in 2016. While the information provided draws on a lot of the information from previous editions, we still learn more information about the Hobgoblin. Maglubiet is back as a true god, and the goblinoid races follow the god with fanatical devotion, but Maglubiet wasn't the creator of the goblinoids. Before Maglubiet, each goblinoid race had their pantheon of gods until they were utterly destroyed by Maglubiet. Now, not all the gods were destroyed, some were allowed to live so long as they became supplicants to the god. Those that tried to push against Maglubiet's conquest were destroyed and their names lost in time. The Hobgoblins worship Maglubiet, but they also pay special reverence to Nomag Gia, a stoic, cold-blooded, and tyrannical leader, and Bardviet, a god of duty, unity, and discipline. Maglubiet allows the Hobgoblins to continue their worship of Nomag Gaia and Bardviet because those gods' view align with his own, and the Hobgoblins continue this tradition of allowing worship to other gods to those that they conquer. When a Hobgoblin legion conquers a territory, they understand that traditions are important to those they conquered and allow them to keep their temples so long as those gods are harmless. If the temples are to a god of war or conquest, the Hobgoblins give an ultimatum: worship Maglubiet or die. Those that refuse to worship Maglubiet are forced to fight and prove the strength of their god. Unfortunately, those who fight have to face a succession of foes, and they are eventually killed as there is no end to the number of foes they must face. Hobgoblins are fearless in battle, not because they aren't afraid of death, but because they know their souls will travel to Acheron and join Maglubiet's forces, where they will fight for eternity against the forces of Grumsh and his orc tribes. While legions of hobgoblins dislike each other and are always proving who is stronger, sometimes a great war chief will be given a holy quest by Maglubiet. They must form a host of hobgoblins, bugbears, and goblins, then lead this army in a great campaign sweeping across the land. Goblinoids put aside their differences when they join the host and do everything they can to further the victories of the host, though if they suffer any wrongs, they will keep a record of it, for when the host inevitably disbands, they will bring these grievances to bear. The host sometimes has enough power to conquer huge swaths of land and become a kingdom in and of itself, though it is rare for it to last very long unless it has many enemies to keep its armies busy and is experiencing victories regularly. The Koalinth also appears in 5th edition, though as part of the Ghosts of Saltmarsh, released in 2019 adventure book, and very little information is provided. They are aquatic hobgoblins, they hate elves, and are focused on excelling at war. There is no mention that they follow Maglubiet, but you can probably expect that they do, and when they die, become the navy of Maglubiet's forces on Acheron. And that is the history of the Hobgoblin. It's one of the few creatures to go from edition to edition with little to no changes to who they are, though their religious doctrine changes greatly. They are a mighty race intent on conquest and can be a great starting army to throw your party against.